How's it guys, this is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, due to us quickly approaching the end of the current FPL season, I wanted to create a video on how you guys can win your mini leagues or boost your overall ranks as high as possible. So this video is going to be for those of you guys who currently are leading your mini leagues or are happy with your overall rank, but more importantly for those of you who are chasing your mini leagues and maybe are second or third or maybe even 20th. So throughout this video, we'll be touching on talking points such as effective ownership, captaincy, and all those good things that will hopefully provide the tools to boost your overall rank and win those mini leagues as far as possible. So that's something you're interested in, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So the video is going to be broken up into two sections, namely overall rank and then also mini league. So firstly, we'll be doing an introduction covering some terminology and some definitions that you guys should be intact with if you want to keep those mini league placings or those overall ranks that you currently have, and also if you are chasing in those mini leagues and those overall ranks. We're then going to be touching on mini leagues firstly. So if you guys do want to kind of skip ahead and maybe one of these relates to you a little bit more, just go to the timestamps in the description below or just look at the timeline of the current video and navigate to whatever talking point you do please. Secondly, we're going to be talking about the overall ranking, and if you guys do want to cover kind of both of these, are kind of a merchant of FPL and want to kind of get the best of both worlds, just stick to the video. You can simply just sit back, relax, and enjoy it because I'll be touching on basically both these talking points throughout the video. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is a differential, and I wanted to give you guys the definition of it because I don't think it's as cut and dry as maybe you do think. So the definition of a differential is of showing or depending on a difference varying according to circumstances or relevant factors, and those relevant factors and those circumstances are definitely going to relate to your own FPL squad. But when I mention the word differential, probably one thing springs to mind, and that's a low owned player. And while that is correct, that's probably the most important factor of a differential. It can also be how you run your own FPL team and the decisions you do make. So yes, your transfer plan for those low owned players is important, but then it also relates to maybe your captaincy or your chip strategy. I mean, if you use your chip strategy in a single game week versus a double game week, that could be considered a differential. And if you're going to be going for a captain that is more lowly owned than maybe the popular pick, that also can be considered differential. And basically, if you are chasing in your mini leagues in those overall ranks, you got to kind of collectively have this definition of a differential and incorporate every division of the differential if you want to get the maximum approach for your chasing, if you want to get to win that mini league, or if you want to get to your overall rank goal. So the next talking point we're going to be covering is captaincy, because it is the most important thing of FPL. Basically, before every single season, we talk about how we must nail captaincy to hopefully secure that green arrow. And if you do nail your captaincy, a captain, the most highly scoring player in a specific game week, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a green arrow. And captaincy is very integral to chasing in those mini leagues and those overall ranks. Why? Because you can go differential, maybe go for an option that's not really highly owned, but that also can come back to bite you. And that's the one thing I want you guys to take away from this talking point is captaincy differentials are a high risk, high reward strategy. A couple of weeks ago was the perfect example. Harry Kane was versing Newcastle. Everyone knew that he was going to be one of the most highly captained players in that specific game week. And what happened? He went and scored 2 goals, got maximum bonus points, had a really good scoring week, pretty much was one of the most highly scoring players of that specific game week. And then people who went differential went for another option. It came back to bite them. Everyone captained Harry Kane and he banged and other players didn't. So that's just one of the examples of that high risk, high reward strategy. And I also wanted to put emphasis on this, and why it's a really good talking point ahead of double game week 32 is that it's just a double game week for Spurs, and basically everyone is going to be on Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. So if you guys do want to go differential, maybe you're chasing your mini leagues and your overall ranks by quite a large margin, it's probably the game week to do that, because I think everyone on their dog is going to be captaining Harry Kane or Heung-min Son. But just keep in mind that just because Harry Kane and Heung-min Son are going to be the most captained doesn't mean that they're the worst option or the best option. It's just something that you have to take into consideration. If you really believe that your option is going to be scoring more than Harry Kane, I'd say go for it. But just remember, don't let it sway you, because if Harry Kane bangs, you're going to come back to maybe regret not going for him as the captain. But captaincy, as I said, one of the most important things if you guys are chasing, and just keep an eye on it throughout this season. And I would kind of only go for a really differential captain if you guys are chasing by a large margin. So now going on to the first talking point, as I mentioned, it's going to be the mini league debate and the conversation. So what I did here is I went over to Dayvy versus the World, my own FPL mini league, and I selected the top 5 players currently in that mini league. So congratulations if you guys are on the screen. I wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of a shout out, but the player we're going to be focusing on is going to be Craig Williams at that number 1 spot. And basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the 2nd to 5th place as a kind of, if you're going to be doing an analysis on Craig and you want to finish number 1 in my mini league, what you should do. You could also use a strategy if you guys are quite far behind, but just maybe vary it a bit and go a little bit more differential as you guys have to catch up a lot more points. You can see there, 5th place is only about 20 points off Craig. That can be easily attained in a couple of game weeks time. And so sorry Craig if you didn't want me to kind of highlight your squad, but unfortunately I'm going to be doing it anyway. So as you can see on screen here, this is basically what you have to do. Go to the first place in your mini league or whoever your rival is currently, and this is the analysis that you should do. So bring up their squad. That's the first thing you're going to be doing, is taking analysis of their squad and what the players that they do have, the players that you don't. And what I would do is I'd go onto a Microsoft Word document or maybe go onto a notepad on your PC. And if you're old school, get out the pen and pencil and take a piece of paper or your textbook and make a note of the players that Craig owns that you don't own, and vice versa. This is going to give you a good indication for those differential punts. Maybe if Craig doesn't own a player that's highly owned, you could look at a captaincy option. And also what I would do is take an analysis of the players that Craig owns for the upcoming game weeks. An example of this is that he does own Jesse Lingard. If you don't own Jesse Lingard, the fixture next is going to be Newcastle at home, and I think that Lingard can potentially bang in that game week. So you almost want to bring in a Jesse Lingard to almost counteract, because not only are you trying to catch up the ranks, you're also trying to preserve the rank and not kind of extend that gap between you two too much. And I mean, if Lingard bangs, you don't own him, that's going to extend that lead by quite a high margin. So as you can see on screen here, after doing the analysis of the players that he owns that we don't own and vice versa, we can then take a look at the chip strategy. Unfortunately, Craig actually used the wild card in game week 31, and the reason I'm saying that's fortunate is I don't really want to take an analysis of the current team if the player is going to wild card in the future, because that's really hard to predict. You might bring in a player that he currently owns and then he wild cards them out, and that could be a complete mess. So fortunately, Craig has wild carded in game week 31, and you can actually see it was a pretty good wild card here, almost a perfect wild card strategy. So well done Craig for that one. And then that's the next thing you're going to be looking at, and that's probably the most important thing that I would look at, is going to be the chips that Craig has played. So how you do this is go to the game week manager under Craig's name, and you can then go to the bottom and it tells you the chip strategy that he currently uses. And as you can see, he's used every single chip available to him, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing for you. If you are a manager that currently has some chips in your back pocket, that's going to give you a nice expectation that you can manage to catch up this lead, because obviously Craig has used all the chips. But if you also have used all the chips, that's just something that you take on the chin. And why I'm saying this is probably the most important thing to do. It's going to give you a good realistic expectation if you can actually catch up on Craig or if you can't. Because imagine if Craig hadn't used any chips and you've used all your chips, he's simply going to get some good returns from those chips potentially, and that's probably going to propel him up the ranks even more. So just give you a little bit of an indication there of the chips that Craig has used or hasn't used. And the next thing I'll be looking at is the squad value as well as in the bank. And this is a little bit of a less important thing, because this is going to allow you to maybe predict a transfer that Craig could do. Maybe there's a popular transfer that most people are doing. Maybe it's a Diego Jota to a Mason Mount or something like that. And then you can actually see that Craig has the required amount to do that move. So that could kind of be a potential that he does. But why I say this is probably a less important thing to do is that it's really hard to predict transfers that managers do make, and you might not even be able to predict it before that game week deadline. So I wouldn't be looking too much into predicting. What I would do is take what's in front of me, do that team analysis, and then take it from there with your differentials or what you do. But now that you've done the analysis, what decisions can you make that could vary you and potentially catch up with Craig in that number one spot? And those two things are going to be your transfers and then also your non-transfer decisions. Just remember, when we spoke about that differential aspect, what did we talk about? We talked about captaincy and your chip strategy even being a decision that you can make that will be differential. So the first thing, transfers. Now that you have that lineup, those are two-sided columns of the players that Craig owns and you don't own versus also what you own and Craig doesn't own. You now can make some transfer decisions if you maybe want to take out a player and go a little bit more differential, if you want to bring a player that Craig owns and maybe nullify that effect too much. So that's basically what your transfers come down to. It's either a nullifying transfer or it's either a differential transfer. And that's the kind of two combinations you guys have to decide on, and that depends on how far you are behind Craig and how many points you have to catch up. Then secondly is going to be the non-transfer decisions. Usually it's quite hard to predict a captain, but if a player is in the number one spot, you can generally assume that they're going to be playing quite safe. So what I would kind of predict is that maybe Craig is going to go for a Harry Kane captain. So if you really want to catch up with him, you can maybe go for a non-transfer decision and maybe go for an Ian Nacho as a potential differential captain. So that's basically what you have to do with the mini leagues. It starts off with analysis, and then it comes down to your own intuition and the things that you should be doing in terms of transfers and non-transfer decisions. So now going on to the overall rank discussion and debate, and the number one thing if you are looking to improve your overall rank is going to be effective ownership. There was a massive debate on effective ownership during the last international break and whether you guys should be playing for it or playing not for it, and whether it should actually incorporate into your transfer plans and also your captaincy decisions. And my kind of recommendation would be is I wouldn't look too much into it if I was chasing, but if I was comfortable with my rank, if I was comfortable with my mini league rank, I would then use effective ownership to kind of nullify the effect of maybe other managers. And what I mean by this is if we talk about this single game week coming up, double game week 32, Harry Kane as a captain. If I am number one, if I'm happy with my overall rank, I will definitely look at captaining Harry Kane, and I wouldn't look at many other options unless I was chasing, because you're kind of comfortable there. You don't have to make any out there punts, you don't have to make any out there captaincy decisions, more differential decisions. You can simply sit where you are and go with the safe option and just hope that they return against maybe some other differential options. And that's the thing, is you're doing a low risk strategy. But if you are chasing, if you want to get up in those overall ranks, you maybe have to do a more high risk strategy and go for a more differential captain. So effective ownership, what is effective ownership? You're probably asking me. I've kind of rambled on a little bit about overall rankings, but what is effective ownership? Basically what it is that it refers to the current bracket that you're looking at. So what I mean is you probably heard about top 10k effective ownership. What that means is that that's the effective ownership of a specific player in that specific rank bracket. So the top 10k, top 100k, top 1 million, etc. You can kind of go on whatever you kind of want to in those ranking brackets, but what it combines is it combines the ownership in that specific bracket. So maybe let's say Harry Kane is owned by 100% of managers in the top 10k, then his ownership will be 100%. But what effective ownership comes in and then does is that it combines his captaincy and his triple captaincy into that ownership to give you a more realistic approach into the ownership of Harry Kane at that moment. Because just remember, Harry Kane captain is worth 2 Harry Kanes, not just one. So that kind of combines his effective ownership. So let's do an example here. As I mentioned, Harry Kane ownership is 100%, but now let's think about the captaincy. So let's say Harry Kane was captained by every single manager that does own him, which is 100%. His effective ownership would then be 200%. So what that means is that his ownership is absolutely going to be ridiculous, and I'm thinking that this week is going to be a similar kind of effective ownership because it was that double game week for Spurs. But then you factor in triple captaincy, so now not only Harry Kane is worth 2 Harry Kanes, now he's worth 3 Harry Kanes, and what that means is that his effective ownership could potentially be above 200%. And I think this game week, double game week 32, we're going to see Harry Kane having an effective ownership above 200%. And what that means is that if you've captained Harry Kane and you own him and he manages to bang, you're actually going to be at a disadvantage in that specific rank bracket. I know it's absolutely incredible to think you've owned a player, you've captained him, but it actually will come back to bite you if he goes and bangs a hat-trick or something like that. It's absolutely insane. We saw a similar situation with Bruno Fernandes, high-owned player, captained by a lot of managers. If you own Bruno Fernandes but you don't captain him and he's over 100%, if he does manage to bang, you're at a disadvantage. It's absolutely insane. I think this is basically the reason that the debate sparked, is that you can't really think of effective ownership like this, and it could actually come back to bite you because you're suddenly going for the most highly captained player instead of the player that you think is going to score the most points. I know this is quite confusing and I generally talk quite quickly, so if you guys do have any questions, just drop them down below and I'll be happy to repeat this explanation if you guys are still struggling to understand. But just the one thing to take away from this talking point is that effective ownership is going to be really important to your overall rank. And now let's get on and check how you can actually calculate this effective ownership. So instead of calculating it, I rather just go to a website that does it for me, and we're going to be going over to livefpl.net/EO. So EO stands for effective ownership, obviously, and I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with livefpl.net. I simply just use this website for my live rank updates because it does give you a live update as players do score points, as results do finish, and as days do end in a specific game week. So I use it for my live ranking, but you guys can also use it for other things. They've got a lot of tools that you can kind of keep track of FPL managers. The only thing about it is that it does only update as the deadline does fall. So as you can see, these are going to be the stats for the top 10k and the top 100k, which is my current local bracket for game week 31. So it hasn't updated for game week 32, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's hard to predict a specific side without the knowledge, and that knowledge only gets pumped up as the data gets processed after the deadline. So what I've done here is I've selected a random player. I've gone for Jesse Lingard because we've spoken about him a little bit in this video, and I've looked at his effective ownership in the top 10k and also the top 100k, which as I mentioned is my local bracket. And as you can see here, his effective ownership is 60%. Incorporated into that is the captaincy, which is 1.7% of FPL managers. I'm pretty sure sure those of you who captain Jesse Lingard would have been quite happy. But what I wanted to show you is that his ownership is probably a little bit higher than his overall ownership in the top 10k, just because the captaincy has been factored into it. But I guess at 1.7% doesn't impact it that much. But what you can do here is you can go and highlight any single player that you want to own, and if you are kind of chasing that overall rank and you want to boost your overall rank as much as possible, you can then go and check that top 10k ownership and see the specific player that you want to bring in and how highly owned they are in the top 10k. It's actually been a kind of a weird situation because a lot of us only use the FPL app. We go and check a player, currently 1% ownership, but remember there's a lot of teams in FPL that are currently dead, so maybe that 1% owned player in the top 10k could be a very high owned player. So just keep that in mind if you are considering these decisions. The best example of that is probably Iheanacho. Iheanacho right now is probably low owned, but in the top 10k is quite a high ownership, so just keep that in mind and just use a website like this to keep track of that effective ownership if you guys are doing it. The second thing that you're going to be doing if you want to chase your overall rank, another tool of livefpl.net, is that it does show you the live totals needed for specific rank brackets. And as you can see here, my target is always going to be the top 10k. So what I did there, you can see how far ahead of you. They're 56 points ahead of me, and I only have 7 game weeks to go. So what that means is that I have to catch up 8 points per game week to get into that top 10k. So that's what you kind of have to do, and this gives you a nice realistic approach to if you guys are going to be managing to catch up to that top 10k or whatever kind of rank brackets you want to. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be finishing number 1 overall. There are 234 points ahead of me, so that's going to be quite a few points to catch up from now to the end of the season. But I guess stranger things have happened in FPL. But currently my target is the top 10k, and hopefully I can manage to catch up 8 points per game week. If this is quite a high points per game week that you guys do need, it might be a little bit unrealistic to go for that specific goal, but maybe just reduce your goal, and that could be good enough to maybe achieve that from now to the end of the season. But this is an analysis that you guys have to do, and this gives you a good indication of how differential you guys actually have to be. And when you have decided and seen how many points you have to catch up, you can then move on to the transfers and the non-transfer decisions. And what I mean by this is that if you do have a low amount of points that you need to maybe catch up, maybe just use your transfers. Maybe go for some low ownership players, maybe bring those in. But if you are kind of trailing quite a bit and you need to make massive moves, maybe go for some non-transfer decisions and rather go for a captaincy option that is lowly owned versus a highly owned option. And I think that this week it's going to be one of the most important weeks to go for, because everyone's going to basically captain Harry Kane. And even if you do captain him, you might not come out the best, and with over 200% effective ownership, it might actually be a negative thing if he manages to bang. So this is basically a wrap up the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. I know it was a little bit of a longer video, and I know I spoke quite quickly and covered a lot of detail, but just maybe slow the video down on YouTube if you guys struggle to understand, or just drop a comment down below and I'll get to it as soon as possible. I'll see you guys tomorrow and on Thursday for the regular team previews and team selections, and hopefully we'll be doing another deadline with Dayvy live stream come Friday evening. I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers. Bye.